get good intensities for for Hershey's?
I've got Lifesavers, Jolly Ranchers, and Nerds. And honestly, they're not all that interesting. And that's why I'm here to talk about them. I mean, all I had to do to get this was I walked a couple of minutes to Safeway, spent a few dollars, and came home with them. And in some ways that's great because, you know, I can get candy easily, but on the other hand, why is it like this? I have no idea what kind of people are behind their production. All I know is who the corporations are. Like, for instance, this one's Mars. Mars is the #1 biggest candy company in the world. And this is Ferrero, and Ferrero was owned by Nestle, but Ferrero bought them out in 2018. It's all very confusing, similar names. And the Ferrero group is #2 in the world. And then the Jolly Ranchers, that's Hershey, and Hershey is #5. And there's a kind of facelessness, a soullessness to it. Because I know that at some point, there was a human behind this. At some point, someone was painstakingly going through and designing a candy to work. There was someone behind these candies in the beginning. Or at least in terms of companies that were, candies that were released more recently, like Nerds are from the 80s. They were inspired by something that someone made, someone's artwork. But now I just get them at the store and I don't think anything of it. I mean, let's have a look in here. All the same. There's no real variation, and there's nothing that makes this special. Beyond that, I know all of these companies, these corporations, are using child labor in at least some of their products. And it's hard to find information for what's behind a lot of them, too. Where is the artistry gone? Where's the creativity? As I can tell you for sure, it is not in a handful of Lifesavers. Greg Cohen owns Lofty Pursuits and Public Displays of Confection and runs a large candy-making YouTube channel with over 500,000 subscribers. He uses old Victorian techniques and machines to make his candy. He specializes in image candy, hard candy with pictures in the center. And Greg is, if I've ever seen one, an artist.
Hello and welcome to Lofty Pursuits and Public Displays of Confection in Tallahassee, Florida. Today we're going to have some fun because May the 4th is soon upon us. I've had so much fun with this candy over the years. Back in 2017, when we could still travel, I went to Cincinnati. And one of the things in Cincinnati that they have is some wonderful museums. They have the Museum of Sign Making. They have the Ventriloquism Museum, which I've been actually too scared to go to. Those things creep me out. And they have the Cincinnati Historical Society, which architecturally is a little bit of my childhood. If you're of a certain age, this building will look familiar, but it's going to be kinda hard to place. You see, it's the building the Hall of Justice and the Super Friends were based off. And I was visiting it, in real life, to see an exhibit of the costumes of Star Wars that was a traveling exhibit there when I was there. Yep, it was great. I went to the Hall of Justice to see the Star Wars costumes. I started to build this design with the eye slot, the black line where he sees out of, and then I have a pink line above it, and on either side of the vertical slot, I have other shapes that I'm building to form the entire helmet. Yeah, you probably know what I'm making already. I mean, how cool is this? I could actually compare my work to the archetype of my work itself. Honestly, it was so much fun to see the originals, and I'm old enough to have seen all the originals on opening night. So, it's been a long part of my life, and I think this sort of connects things circularly. My candy back into my childhood fun, back into my fandom fun. And just looking at the video, I realized all the duplicate copies, showing that I made clones of a single individual. And I guess that also brings us full circle.
It is a demanding and complicated process. But the reason I got into hard candy is sort of a mirror of what I do. I talk a lot about this at various times. I see that there is no division between life, art, creativity, and play. Because art is play. And a lot of people miss this point. They miss the point that that is the purpose of it. So I've done everything from sculpture to engineering. I used to be a commercial artist, but I've done welding. I have a lot of background skills. The business that I'm in now started by manufacturing juggling equipment, specializing in fire juggling equipment and shipping it worldwide. We were the largest retailer of yo-yos for over a decade, and I ran the World Yo-Yo Contest for 14 consecutive years. The answer of why am I doing candy? Because it was the next thing. I was at a yo-yo contest. The brother of one of the yo-yo players brought some of his candy. He was a trained candy maker. And I was looking for a show in my store. And piecing the store together was important. We were a toy store that had expanded into ice cream. And I wanted to bring people back regularly for a show. Could the show be reading children's books? Sure. Or live music? Sure. But there were problems with both of them. So I thought candy making would be it, and would also let us produce a product that no one else had. And I brought him in, and he never thought I could learn, but the fact is, I'm better at learning skills than most people out there. And I did. And after 2 years, as agreed, he left. And I've been continuing to do it for another decade or so.
The advantages of the big companies is that they have research laboratories, and they can, take care of any of these microbiological problems, and that's all documented, and they've got a lot of things going for them that way. But the disadvantage is they can't put the love into it. Like when we're pulling the ribbon candy, we're using like cotton jersey gloves. So when we're pulling it out, like our thumbs and fingers, glove encased, are shining the actual material, the hard candy. So it's not like the big companies have to use an extruder or something with like little barbs on it to pull it. So it's marked up, and it probably doesn't look as nice, although a lot of their things can be extremely uniform because they're processed in these beautiful molds or metal shapes that can make it perfect. Whereas when you're doing it by hand, they're not all perfect. And that is just a expression to the customer that this is handmade and it's not just mass produced cookie cutter style.
For me, it started in 2015 in Denmark at a shop called SØMODS BOLCHER. That little store was the first, and to this day only, excluding my own kitchen of course, place where I saw candy being made by hand. I remember watching a man pulling a huge batch of sugar through the window. It was almost the size of his torso. Every wall of the shop was lined with jars of beautiful, glimmering candies. I left that shop with a bag of rhubarb candy that I've thought about every day since. I was only 14, but I was determined to learn how to make my own candy once I realized it was possible. I tried to make candy a few times after that, but it wasn't until January 2021 that I really got started. The COVID-19 pandemic left me, like everyone else, stuck at home. I wanted to do something meaningful with my time and learn something new, and I had to get away from the monotony of online classes and work. I didn't want to deal with the reality of the pandemic, so instead I decided to spend my time learning an old art. I finally had the time and energy I needed to dedicate to candy making. Jerry Rowley owns Logan's Candies in Ontario, California. They specialize in handmade candy canes and ribbon candy, which they sell year-round. They are home to the world's largest handmade candy cane made from a single batch of sugar. It's 16 feet long and weighs 30 pounds. While they're known for their candy canes, they also make a variety of other candies, including chocolates.
Candy all the time because that's really the fun part. It's just fun to make candy. Today, in fact, you can't see it, but right behind me here, I have a huge slab of marshmallow that we just made. I don't know if you can see that, but it basically that's a one big giant piece of marshmallow, and it's cut in little pieces. We're going to pull that apart just a little bit here, and then we'll start to dip it in chocolate. We have some heart shapes that we're going to write Happy Mother's Day on and things like that. But even as we made it, now this was in the back room, but the employees come back here. They're all like, "Oh, let me lick the bowl." I mean, who doesn't want to lick the mixing bowl or the mixing blades or whatever? So it's a lot of fun. We have a lot of fun here. We try to make what we do here fun, not only for our employees and ourselves, but also for our customers. We try to.
The candy making process looks pretty straightforward on paper, though it does require a lot of precision. First, you mix your ingredients together in a pot: sugar, water, and an invert sugar or glucose syrup. Corn syrup is a common glucose syrup and the most easily obtained one in the United States, and it is used to prevent crystallization. I have also found in my own cooking that candy made with corn syrup doesn't get as sticky as candy made without. Next, the candy is heated to a specific temperature. All temperatures on the diagram are in Fahrenheit. The temperature the candy needs to be cooked to varies depending on the type of candy being made. Hard candies are cooked to the hard crack stage, whereas pralines are cooked only to the soft ball stage. The candy is poured out of the pan and onto a cooling table or other workspace. I use an oiled skillet. The extract and food coloring are added at this stage, and after the candy is cooled to 260 degrees Fahrenheit, citric acid can be added too. Citric acid burns at higher temperatures and will ruin a batch if added too soon. Now this is my favorite part. Once the candy has cooled enough to handle with gloves, it's time to start pulling it. Pulling candy adds air bubbles to the sugar. The air bubbles make the candy crunch more, melt in your mouth, and the bubbles reflect light so that the candy becomes shiny and opaque. This part reminds me a little of working with molten glass. Not all hard candies are pulled, but I think the process is fun, so I pull all of mine. Finally, it's time to pull ropes of the candy and cut it. This part is difficult because candy cools quickly. There isn't much time to work, so you'd better be quick.
Making hard candy is very different than chocolate. And because of that, physics comes into play. And the more chemistry and physics you know, the better candy you can make. I'm sure all the people who work for the major candy companies, the Nestle's of the world, the actual food scientists, have the background necessary, but very few of us little guys do. The candy, like we pull the candy to add the white bubbles, but I also make sure there's a certain percentage of pulled candy in certain flavors because the air bubbles give more surface area and the candy in that part dissolves faster. So it affects the flavor. Like I said, there are different textures in hard candy. They're just not as obvious. So a lot of what I do is playing with things that are invisible, that you don't know is there, but you can tell the difference about. And I like that invisibility of, you know, half the difficulty of making candy is knowing what temperature something is without seeing the temperature, because you have to feel it. You have to know what's going on in the candy. And if you don't do that, these designs and the stripes don't work.
Well, the ribbon candy is one of our specialties here, and we have been making the peanut butter filled for, I don't know, probably 70 years, maybe here. I introduced the chocolate filled one with the mint flavor, but it's basically you're making a traditional hard candy, and we call it making a jacket, a sleeve, and a jacket. So you're taking the big hard candy pieces, and as they're cooling, you would incorporate the filling into one of these. We basically make like two big, better term, just making a pizza. So then you're putting the filling in, traditionally peanut butter or chocolate. Now the trick or the key to making a filled candy is that the filling has to be the same temperature as the hard candy, or the filling will rob all the heat from the hard candy and it'll solidify too quickly. So not only do you want to make it the same temperature, but you probably want to make it, the goal is to make it as most consistent in like viscosity too. So you can't have like hot liquid. You've got to have something that's, you know, like peanut butter is good because it thickens and you can make it nice and warm. Chocolate is a little more difficult because chocolate itself, when it's warmed up, is very runny and thin. So you have to thicken it. So that's basically the procedure, is making the center similar to the hard candy and then pulling it out in tubes. So you have layers of candy and filling. So it's kind of like a multiple capacity life raft. You wouldn't want a life raft with just one air hole, and then if it gets punctured, you lose all your air. So you want separate compartments. So if one gets punctured, you don't lose the air out of the whole thing. So by layering it and pulling out in tubes and folding it in, you have layers of filling and candy, and then it helps if there were a break in the outer shell, that you don't lose all your filling. So then it's wrapped with the jacket on the outside, and when we're pulling it out, obviously we want to make it very thin because it's so much easier to eat that way. So it's all done by hand. You pull it out the front of the candy and make like a big neck to it, and then pull it out similar to like the shape of a yardstick. And then it's stood up on its edge and fed through a crimper. So the crimper we have was patented in, I think, 1886. It was a hand crank. We have put it to a gear motor, so we don't have to crank it by hand, but it's still very old equipment that we're using to shape the ribbons itself. But the thickness and the length and all that's all done by hand still. So it's just the actual crimping that's done by a crimping machine.
Okay, so Neapolitan, how are we going to manage this one? Becca and I learned how to make candy together. It was always more of my project, but they got interested over time after I kept asking them to help me out. On more ambitious flavors, we work together. It's always helpful to have another set of hands and another brain that understands candy around. To me, candy is about connections and communication with other people. Candy plays big roles in our lives from a social standpoint. Just think about Valentine's Day and Halloween. It only stands to reason that the production process should be collaborative too. And now let's talk flavors. Let's see, so chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry. Let's start with planning out the chocolate because we've only done that flavor once before and I wasn't completely satisfied with it.
And before we didn't have the chocolate extract.
Right. So with standard flavors, what I've been doing is doing 1.5 teaspoons of extract for a 1 pound batch. We could potentially stick with that and then also add some cocoa powder. I think last time we added, what, 1/4 cup?
Yeah, we added about a quarter cup, but only about 6 tablespoons were able to get incorporated in the candy.
Right. Yeah, I think, honestly, an 1/8 cup sounds right to me.
I agree.
I think this is going to be pretty standard, 1.5 teaspoons of extract.
Same vanilla we use for almost everything.
Yeah. Yeah, and strawberry, I remember what I did yesterday when I made it, so 1.5 teaspoons of extract. And since this isn't quite as sour as the lemon, I did only 1 teaspoon of citric acid as opposed to 1.5 teaspoons.
Okay. And I think that flavor was still strong enough to hold up to the vanilla and chocolate. Should be good.
I think so. And then in terms of food coloring, the only one we need to add coloring to is the strawberry, and I think just because this is more of an ice cream type flavor, I would be inclined to do more of a pink than the red I did for the strawberry the other day.
I fully agree.
So then I was thinking in terms of general look of the candy. So I know with our creamsicle candy, our technique is kind of like wrap the vanilla and then pull it twice to get some stripes. I'm almost inclined to try something a little different with the Neapolitan.
I agree. I think we should stack the triangles like a Triforce.
Oh, that could be interesting. Yeah, I had been thinking of putting them all side by side, but I actually like that, so let's make a little diagram.
What are we setting the oven to?
200.
Right.
Because that will be low enough that we have no chance of the citric acid burning.
Yes.
And also, we're not in danger of going towards caramel in any way, shape, or form. So to recap, 2 kettles, 3 skillets, oiled sheet pan. Remind me what we're doing with the oiled sheet pan.
We're putting the pulled blocks of candy on it when we're ready to start working with the chocolate.
Right. Yeah, okay, right, to avoid them taking up unpulled candy.
Yes.
Okay. And then we have our 3 spatulas, we have the 2 good ones, and then also a wooden spoon and a plastic spatula in reserve.
Yes.
And the oven's at 200 degrees.
Oh, and we should pull out the coconut oil and put the brush in it just to prepare.
Right. And then in terms of ingredients, for the chocolate, which is going to be in the oven so it doesn't cool too quickly, we're doing an 1/8 cup cocoa powder and 1 teaspoon of chocolate extract, and you are going to pull that one.
Yes.
And then the vanilla and the strawberry we're working with right off the bat. 1.5 teaspoons of extract for the vanilla. We are omitting citric acid for these. And I'm going to be pulling the vanilla. And you will be on the strawberry, which is going to need 1.5 teaspoons of strawberry extract and 1 teaspoon of citric acid. And finally, we're going to be assembling these as a pyramid with the strawberry on top, the vanilla on the left, and the chocolate on the right on the table. And we're not pulling it additionally once this is assembled. So then we'll pull it out and we should hopefully get nice tricolored candies.
Yes, and with our cutter we shouldn't get rotation like we used to sometimes. We should hopefully be able to keep straight lines.
Yeah, we definitely still get some rotation, but I think for Neapolitan, that's going to be just fine. Alright, I think we're good to go.
I think so too.
Let's get started.
Alright.
nothing today.
Yeah, okay.
Gotta move quick. And that is just about perfect. Hard candy making is a rare skill today, and many of the people who still make it are descended from candy makers and learned from their families. Warren Schimpf and his wife Jill Schimpf own and operate Schimpf's Confectionery in Jeffersonville, Indiana. It's the oldest retail business in town.
In 1891, my great-grandfather moved over to Jeffersonville and started the business here. And we've been in the same location, the same building. Family lived upstairs. They rented the building in 1891 for $300 a year, $250, $25 a month. And that was the downstairs and upstairs. And we continue to live upstairs and work downstairs. Anyway, got a PhD in environmental chemistry from the University of Michigan. Spent 25 years working in California, and during that period, my aunt and cousin, who were the owners at the time, he died in 88, she died in 89. The business had to be sold. So Jill and I jumped in and bought the business to keep it in the family, keep it going, keep history alive, keep the family history, the community history alive. We couldn't see it, the business die. For 10 years, we, so to speak, commuted from California to oversee operations, make candy. And then in the year 2000, we both retired from our jobs in California. Joe was teaching at Pitzer College, English as a second language. And I was working with Metropolitan Water District, Southern California. So we retired in 2000 and moved here.
And often people ask, why did the Schimpfs go into candy making? Had they done that in Germany? And they had not. And the best reason we can see for starting up a candy business is that it didn't take much money. So it was a little easier on the immigrants if they didn't have to pay a lot to get into a business. And it was something that everybody knew a little bit about, and that was cooking. So,
as Jill said, everyone knows a little bit about cooking. However, candy making is far less common now. I stumbled across this book called A Little Candy Book for a Little Girl in my research. It was published in 1918, and it tells the story of a little girl named Betsy Bobbitt learning to make candy alongside her mother. The book is full of recipes meant for mothers to teach their daughters, from hard candies to caramels to fudge. It also outlines the procedures for simpler things, like making popcorn and salted nuts. It's interesting to me because candy making doesn't seem like such an exceptional thing to teach a child in this book. It's right alongside something as easy as making popcorn. It seems perfectly normal. Today, I can't imagine any typical mother teaching her children how to make candy. It would be seen as too difficult or too dangerous on account of the stove, and besides that, most mothers wouldn't even know where to start. I also have to imagine how much a mother would have to care to teach her daughter how to make candy. Candy making takes a lot of work, and teaching a child would take a lot of patience. If someone takes careful time to teach a skill to their children, I think it shows that the skill is worth something.
Sure. Logan's has been in downtown Ontario since 1933. We were originally out on Euclid Avenue, which is the main street here in downtown Ontario, which is about, just a couple blocks up from where we are now, from 1933 till 1953. Then we moved down to B Street here in 1953, which is our current location. And I started working here in 1974. So the original owners ran it from 33 till 74. And then in 1974, they sold it to a really good friend of my mom and dad's. And then they asked me to come work here. That's how I got involved. And I started working here for them for 4 years. I worked Christmas time mostly, and then they started having me come in at Easter, a couple of the holidays. And then in 1978, they sold it to a local teacher here in Upland, California. And he then hired me on, and I continued to work for him for holidays for the next 4 years. Started doing more and more cooking, making more and more of the candy. And then in 1982, me and my wife Susie bought the store, and we've been running it ever since.
Well, first of all, there is a community of us out here, but I seem to be the only one who started fresh. You know, you take a look at Hercules Candies, and they're on the 3rd or 4th generation. You look at Schimpf's Confectioneries, they're on their 12th generation. know, 10, something ridiculous. I'm really not sure anymore. You look at Shane's in Philadelphia, and it's been open since the early 1800s. Even though the Barley Brothers now run it, it's still the same tradition and better than ever because of them. You take a look at there's just some of these people are still around, and they're doing different things, and they're preserving different bits of history. But honestly, history is one of these parts of that I see that doesn't separate art and life. It's part of seeing what happened before. Reinventing the wheel is what people constantly try to do. And we have forgotten more amazing things than we have learned. So I've collected a library of candy making books going back to the early 1800s. I've got a collection of interviews I did with old candy makers where I've taken notes, just where I called people up and I talked to people who are in their 80s and said, what did you do 50 years ago? What did your grandfather do? And they gave me recipes and flavor ideas.
Okay, so what are you thinking?
I'm thinking something kind of similar to what we normally do, probably. Something simple.
Mm-hmm. Right, okay, so probably try for a drop candy or something?
Yeah.
Right.
The taffies are lovely, but they take a lot of time, so maybe not those.
I mean, they're not really any harder than what we're already doing. We just don't have as much experience.
That's true. Yeah, still. Stick jaw.
That sounds pleasant. It's interesting to me that they're boiling their taffy to hard crack. I'm wondering if they're just making it sticky and stretchy with water content.
Oh, yeah.
We're looking through an ebook called The Candy Maker's Guide. I didn't have a mentor to teach me how to make candy, so I taught myself some bare bones basics, and then I taught Becca what I'd figured out, and we put 2 and 2 together with some more practice. Old books like this have been crucial to our candy education. I think this one is especially cool because it has illustrations and prices for a whole bunch of candy equipment alongside plenty of recipes. We decided to try making one of the recipes in the book, partly to see if we could do it, and partly because, well, don't you want to know what the 1800s tasted like? It's a way to bring history into the present moment. Old-fashioned candy makers are still using equipment from the early 1900s and late 1800s. They use everything from candy molds and buttercup cutters to ribbon candy crimpers, humbug cutters, and drop rollers. Drop rollers are probably one of the more common machines still used in production. They work a little bit like the strangest pasta machine you've ever seen. Candy is fed between the patterned rollers, which press it into a sheet of shapes that breaks apart when dropped. This is actually why cough drops are called cough drops. The originals were made on drop rollers. Though the machines are often in rough condition 100 or more years after they were manufactured, they still work, and some candy makers have learned to restore them to their original condition.
Now, why the Victorian candy? It all started sort of on a lark. The guy I was learning from knew nothing about these machines. And I found some, of all things, in Craigslist in Ohio, and I bought it off a lady. And she was very dubious about shipping it. So I sent her money and said, keep the money for a month and ship it off when you're sure I can't get it back. I trust you. It's the only way to get something like this. She mailed me 4 machines, and I went nuts because I couldn't get them to work. Those machines are not as easy to use or as obvious to use as people think, because it's all temperature control. You can't see what's going on. You have to feel what's going on, and who's going to teach you that? Well, the answer is somebody who was reading me bitch about this was a guy named Warren Schimpf in Jeffersonville, Indiana, who owns a candy shop that he's owned since, or his family has owned since, I think, before 1900. He has more equipment than me from that time period, but they cheated. They bought it new. And he is a wonderful man. Him and his wife stopped by the store and spent a day, because he'd always wanted to make cut rock, but he never had. So we made 2 batches of cut rock with him, and he made 2 batches of drop candy with us. And then I had enough base knowledge that I continued to use the machines. And he was amazed at how I fixed up the machine. And we're going back to what I said before. I know metal work. So I was able to restore the brass. The metal I could fix with reverse electroplating. I could use techniques that are used to repair basically vintage tools, which I've done before. And I'm talking about woodworking tools primarily. And it applied directly over to this. I found some old books that covered how to maintain and clean this stuff from the 1800s and sort of learned things that had been lost. And then I'm good at finding things. So I went from having 3 sets of rollers and 3 machines that did different things to now I have, I don't know, probably 40 or 50 machines and well over 100 sets of rollers. Because once I started restoring it and started using it, old candy makers from around the country would contact me and said, I have this machine, would you buy it off me? I want somebody to have it who will use it. I don't want it to go into a museum. I don't want it to get thrown out. And I sort of feel like they're trusting me with the history of their industry.
Thomas Mills was in the East Coast was the premier manufacturing center of the country, Boston, Philadelphia, and of course Chicago. So, but Philadelphia was the kind of the mecca for candy equipment manufacturing for the small business. They also made ice cream equipment, ice cream machines. A lot of candy equipment came out of Chicago too, a little bit later. But the Thomas Mills Brothers Company of Philadelphia, they made the drop roll machine that we use. And they also made a number of other machines, ribbon candy machine, what they call a pillow machine, a pillow cutter, which cuts ropes of candy into little pillows. They end up looking like little pillows. They're pinched at either end.
The name of the piece of equipment was the 20th Century Candy Cutter. They were so proud of being part of the 20th century, they named the machine after the 20th century.
I think it's pretty safe to say that one of the first problems I ran into with candy making shortly after I figured out how to turn the candy into hard candy and not just syrup that coated every surface of my kitchen was cutting it. The thing with hard candy is, if you're not making cut rock, if you want to make humbugs or pillow mints or something, what you kind of have to do is you have to take your candy block and pull out ropes of it and cut it all by hand with scissors. This isn't all that feasible when you also have maybe 5 minutes before the candy hardens. I texted my dad and let him know, hey, there's a project I'm interested in because I live in a 450 square foot apartment. There just isn't that much space for woodworking tools. But, you know, I texted him, we talked a little bit about what I was thinking about, and together we kind of came up with this design. Now, this is just a prototype. Next model, the plan is make the spacing a little bit smaller, and we're discussing different types of cuts. Like, would it be possible to make new shapes or new patterns or something? But this all came out of looking at some patents from the 1800s. Honestly, I'm not sure if there are modern buttercup cup cutters being made or not. I don't know. I haven't found anyone making homemade buttercup cutters, that's for sure.
Well, it's in a sense a dying industry as far as the way it was made in the old days. And of course, the family history, so it's a dying industry, it's family history, it's real, and so many real things are being phased out, or it's just click and punch a button and it happens, and kids don't see any reason why pork comes from pigs. I mean, it's not real. So that is something that we want to continue, is reality. And we were the anchor of the downtown area and the economic feel of it, so that we're the oldest retail business in downtown, or the oldest retail business
In
in
Jeffersonville.
Jeffersonville. The older business is not retail, it's the undertaker. And that's kind of true in most communities. They were cabinet makers to begin with, and then they wound up being undertakers. So we have a more pleasant business than that.
Of course, our business, we're working on getting the 5th generation. We don't have children, but we have a cousin's son who's 5th generation. He and his family are looking at the future of our business, to keep it in the family and keep it going, keep the traditions going. That's more specific to our business. In general, candy, I think there's going to be more artisan type candy makers, just like there are artisan craft beer, and the small distilleries are getting involved. There's going to be more artisan candy out there. But as far as we're concerned, it doesn't tell the history of candy. It just takes a new twist to an old craft. And we think there'll be a few small candy makers around that'll keep the traditions going. An effort in this country for candy makers, people like myself, and other people that are going to stay involved with the craft of dealing with sugar and dealing with the handmade candies, the old handmade candies, mostly hard candies. I think there's going to be a number of places that'll continue that tradition, and it's people come in here and are fascinated by just seeing how sugar, you pour it in a pot with water, boil it, pour it out on the table, and it's transformed into a suckable piece of candy like a lifesaver. I think people are fascinated to see that. When you buy lifesavers, you have no idea how they're made or anything like that. So there you go. And that's the way I want to wrap them. You find me the machine, and that's what I want. So that's the way. Knowing how to see that's done on a small scale, I think is what's going to keep us going here, at least for a while.
And I've been fixing up the machines because I figure one of my apprentices sooner or later will break off on their own. I think I know who it's going to be, a former apprentice. And I feel it's my obligation to set them up with a good hook, a couple of rollers, and a good machine. They're on their own for the cooling table, and we go from there.
All right, so I think we've come to perhaps either the easiest or the hardest question on the list. What's your favorite candy?
For me, it's the English toffee. That's the one I like to make. One of the things I like to make, although I don't make it much anymore. It's one I like to make, and I think we make a very good English toffee. And whenever I go, which in some places it's called almond roca, almond crunch, butter crunch. It goes by different names. We call it English toffee.
You want it to have a little snap and not be tacky.
So we coat ours in dark chocolate and roll it in almonds. And I think that's one of the best. And then my second best is what I enjoy eating are our bourbon balls. So those are my favorites.
Even though we're Indiana, we steal a little bit of the idea from Kentucky for bourbon balls. We think ours is better.
We have to find what you make.
And my favorite is the peanut cluster, dark chocolate with a vanilla cream center, I guess, and bourbon balls, peanut brittle. See, if I get started, I could say that they're all my favorites, except I don't care for the crystallized orange peel dipped in chocolate. I don't tend to like bitter things, and the orange peel is bitter. But lots of people like it.
But boy, when you know, whatever you're making at the time, when you're eating it warm, it just gives you that much better taste, and you can just smell it and you're eating it. And I mean, I do have a couple favorites, but boy, whatever you're making at the time is always some of the tastiest stuff.
Before truffles became the European style truffle with the ganache in it, we always made a truffle with hazelnut paste. So it's a very fine roasted hazelnuts with sugar, and people call it Figaro now. It's a very popular name for it, and we just call it a traditional truffle, and that with a cup of coffee, and you got the world by the tail.
What's my favorite candy? I could tell you in different things. My favorite candies, and I'm going to disregard everything I make. There's a little French chocolate shop I discovered in Paris that makes triangular pieces of toffee the toffee itself is about as thick as a thin sheet of cardboard that's chocolate coated with thinner chocolate on either side. So it's like picking up something the thickness of a thick potato chip that is toffee in the center and chocolate on the outside and dark and milk. And they make them in triangles and put them like a Tantrix puzzle into a triangular box. And you open up the box and you fold out these triangular pieces of brown paper, and there are 2 or 3 shades because of the different chocolates inside it. And the smell comes out. And they might have an orange in one triangle or something else in another. And it puts a smile on my face. And I just think of how difficult it is to work with the toffee, which is hard candy, the chocolate, which is soft candy, keep them from sticking together and keep them from breaking. And they traveled all the way from Paris. I think about the candies that are made fresh in Japan that I've had friends bring over to me, but since they only have a lifespan of about a week, they're hammered with flavors like plum with doughs that are gooey candies that you can't taste except if they're made fresh. It's absolutely wonderful, but it's one of these things that's so ephemeral. And I love things that are trapped in time and trapped in the moment. And there are flavors and there are textures like that. I think right now I'm going through things that I like in candies, the variation, the textures, which my candy doesn't have as much because it's hard candy. I mean, there is some texture variation because I pull some of it. I don't pull other bits, but it's that. I think of a lady in Scotland who makes something called tablet. It's a type of fudge. She makes it for Easter, and she puts little crosses on the top of each one. And most people think fudge is a chocolate, and it's actually a caramel. And she makes it in such a way that it almost dissolves instantaneously on your tongue. So it's like you're eating something that you can taste, but you can't feel. And it's, once again, this little miracle of candies, I like anything that when you look at it, it changes. When you taste it, it changes, I remember when I read in one of these old soda fountain books that you can't taste orange under a certain temperature. So if you make a chocolate orange milkshake, which we do in our store, you take a sip and you get this beautiful chocolate flavor, and then your tongue warms up and the orange takes over and overwhelms it. It's like flavor lava lamps. That's fun. I like thinking of candy in ways that other people don't. Syrups are candy. They're just watery candy. So we make all of our soda fountain syrups because we have, I don't know, $20,000 worth of weird extracts and oils just laying around. I love playing with flavors that are shouldn't be used in candy, but do. We do a Thanksgiving assortment. We call it a Thanksgiving feast. And everybody's shocked when they put the ham in their mouth because it doesn't taste like candy. It tastes like ham. But the texture and the conveyance is confusing, and I love watching their face for that. And the beet candy was really good too this year, although that was a really hard flavor to work with. You know, I love finding flavors that I've never heard of, like Saskatoon berries from northern Canada, or you know, they're all the or snowberries from above the Arctic Circle in the Scandinavian countries, or and I have to track down the fruit because you can't balance a flavor if you don't know how it's supposed to taste. And that's always been difficult. And that's why I'll never make durian, because I tracked one down. But you know, where is the boundaries of candy and flavor and imagination? And that goes back to the lack of a difference between work, play, fun, philosophy. You know, art is play. And if you do it right, I'm not going to say everything with work is great. I hate doing my taxes. But you can make yourself smile and other people smile. And with lofty pursuits, you know how businesses are supposed to have a business motto or some sort of one-sentence description of what their business philosophy is. And it's, we sell happiness. Nothing else matters.